this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. Just so long as I'm the dictator.
I've got a pen and I've got a phone. And I can use that pen to sign executive orders.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
And when they say, I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up.
My change in party will enable me to be re-elected.
I actually did vote for the $87 billion before I voted against it. Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I.
It is the constitutional position. It is the advice of the founders to follow a non-interventionist foreign policy. Stay out of entangling alliances.
Dangerous man, citizen. Avert your eyes. Don't you dare listen to this man. Avert your eyes, citizen. He's extreme. He's dangerous. He's crazy. He's not respectable.
Welcome to Liberty or Death Radio, sounding the alarm of freedom to an awakening citizenry and setting brush fires in the minds of men. This is episode 4, and this episode will be covering police brutality. Oftentimes, the motto of police is to protect and serve. However, we find police brutality is constantly occurring in their interactions with citizens. Oftentimes, there's an us versus them mentality on the part of the police, meaning us, the police, versus them, the citizens. The Andy Griffith era of law enforcement officers is dead and gone these days, it seems. Even small-town police officers are armed to the teeth and are often treat citizens as the enemy. The Cato Institute reports of policemen's conduct across the country. Here are a few snapshots of that police misconduct. In Worcester, Massachusetts, a police officer has been arrested on home invasion and assault charges. He forced his way into his ex-wife's home and struck her companion in the face and neck. In Arkansas, a detective is facing felony charges after an investigation by state police. He is accused of accessing secure information about a case involving a family member that was being investigated by police. In Fort Smith, Arkansas, a now former police officer has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for having sex with a girl who was 16 at the time. In Oklahoma, a state trooper has been arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol while on duty after he crashed an Oklahoma Highway Patrol sport utility vehicle that was towing an OHP boat. In Clay County, Florida, the sheriff has suspended 2 detectives and 2 supervisors without pay and will assign them to patrol for wrongfully arresting a Louisiana woman. In Maricopa County, Arizona, a man is suing a deputy after he says a deputy collided with his truck and then handcuffed the plaintiff when he tried to write down the deputy's license plate number. In Alamance County, North Carolina, the sheriff allegedly ordered his deputies to stop and arrest motorists who appear to be Hispanic. The U.S. Justice Department brought the charges after interviewing more than 125 victims and personnel over the course of several years. The investigation found the drivers who were Hispanic were being pulled over at an alarming rate for minor traffic offenses. Going to the more in-depth stories now from KVAL-TV in Oregon, we found that over the July 4th weekend, Eugene, Springfield, and Oregon State Police had a no-refusal weekend. Police planned to work in coordination with prosecutors and judges to quickly obtain blood draw warrants for drivers who refuse blood alcohol content testing. With the approval of a judge, anyone suspected of impaired driving who unlawfully refuses to provide a breath sample is subject to blood testing at the scene, a medical facility, or nearest jail facility, police said. Anyone who refuses to take a breath test faces loss of their license for a year. Can you believe that in America we could have such a thing as a forced blood withdrawal simply because you refuse to take a breathalyzer test? From ABC 7 News in Chicago, reporting Indiana police officers being kept off the streets for now after being caught on camera tipping a man out of his wheelchair. This incident happened last October in Lafayette, Indiana, but the video has just been released. Despite the police department recommending that the lieutenant be fired, a review board decided to suspend him for 30 days instead. Now that officer is back on the job, the department reassigned him to desk duty. I did see the video, didn't see any audio in that video, but there's no way that a man in a wheelchair would be a threat unless he had a dangerous weapon, which he did not appear to have. No reason for him to be tipped over out of his chair onto either the concrete of the sidewalk or the pavement of the street. Alicia Fonsavant, writing for Salon.com, recounts the story of a home invasion by a SWAT team looking for simple possession of marijuana. She says that they were visiting a relative's residence and a SWAT team broke down the door and threw a flash grenade inside. It landed in her son's crib. So much for protect and serve. As we know, flashbang grenades are created for soldiers to use during battle. They have a bright flash and a loud bang. It's basically a distraction maneuver on the part of an invading force. This flashbang grenade was thrown inside the baby's crib, and a hole was blown in his chest that exposed his ribs. The husband's nephew, the one they were looking for, wasn't even in the house at the time, and these officers, armed with basically M16s, marched into the house like they were in a war game. They never found any drugs. She says, "I heard my baby wailing and asked one of the officers to let me hold him. He screamed at me to sit down and shut up and blocked my view so I couldn't see my son. I could see a singed crib, and I could see a pool of blood." Can you imagine being in this mother's place, seeing your son in a little crib, crying, seeing a pool of blood? She continues, "The officers yelled at me to calm down and told me my son was fine, that he had just lost a tooth. It was only hours later when they finally let us drive to the hospital that we found that Boo Boo, as his name is, was in the intensive burn unit." She recounts later on, quote, "A few nights ago, my 8-year-old woke up in the middle of the night screaming, 'No, don't kill him. You're hurting my brother. Don't kill him.' She says, 'How can I ever make that go away? I used to tell my kids that if they were ever in trouble, they should go to the police for help. Now my kids don't want to go to sleep at night because they're afraid the cops will kill them or their family. It's time to remind the cops that they should be serving and protecting our neighborhoods, not waging war on the people in them.' We find out an update that the baby has since walked on his own, and we're glad to hear for that recovery. You can find out more at justiceforbabybooboo.com. The Roanoke Times reports about Larry Wayne Dodson, a 52-year-old man who's confined to a wheelchair because of a previous accident. On April 25th of this year, Dodson was arrested. But why did police remove him from his motorized scooter, handcuff him, and have him hauled away in an ambulance? Why was his scooter impounded by a tow truck driver? Why did a magistrate set bond at $1,000? You're not going to believe the outrageous behavior of the officers in this situation. Dodson was out about town, going about his business. He went into the turn lane to get into the mall parking lot. But just before he got to the light at the bottom of southbound 220, a Roanoke County police officer pulled him over. She said to him, "You're supposed to go with the flow of the traffic." He disagreed and said it was safer to go against the flow of the traffic because he considered himself a pedestrian. However, state law considers an electric scooter or wheelchair a personal assistive mobility device which counts as a vehicle. Quoting the code, "Except as otherwise provided by law, on all highways of sufficient width, the driver of a vehicle shall drive on the right half of the highway, unless it is impracticable to travel on such side of the highway, and except when overtaking or in passing another vehicle." Impracticable means more or less impossible. Would it have been impossible for Dodson to cross to the other side of Electric Road and drive his scooter on the shoulder in the same direction as traffic? Probably not, but it would be impractical and perhaps suicidal. He would have to cross 5 lanes of traffic in one of the busiest commercial stretches of road in the Roanoke Valley twice. And it's a no-brainer that he didn't want to do that. So he argued with the officer. Then she called for backup. Dodson argued with him too. Then the Dodson said that the male officer ordered him to stand up. Quote, "I can't stand up. That's why I'm in the wheelchair." He acknowledged that he, quote, might have called the first officer a word that refers to a female dog, and that he might have uttered an expletive that begins with the term dumb mother toward the second. Dodson said the second officer grabbed him and threw him face down on the ground. They handcuffed him behind his back, placed him under arrest, summoned an ambulance to transport him. Police charged Dodson with driving the wrong way, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. It's unclear what Dodson did to merit the last charges, resisting arrest. State law says merely running one's mouth doesn't constitute disorderly conduct. The law also defines resisting arrest as fleeing or attempting to flee. Dodson said he never tried to leave the scene. The spokesman for Roanoke County says that the officer explained to Dodson that he needed to stop yelling at her or he would be arrested, but he continued to yell. He was asked 2 times to place his arms behind his back or be removed from the wheelchair and arrested. Mr. Dodson made no attempt to comply with the officer's request. They removed him from the wheelchair, handcuffed him, and took him to jail. End of quote. So my question is this: how is it a crime to yell at a police officer? Is that a threat? Is that something that constitutes a danger to the officer's safety? In what way is yelling at a police officer a threat? In what way is that breaking the law? I can't see of any way that would be breaking law or worthy or deserving of an arrest. But the Roanoke County spokesman said that he was warned that he had to quit yelling or he was going to be placed under arrest. Sounds outrageous to me. NBC Los Angeles reports that the California Highway Patrol is investigating after cell phone video captured an officer repeatedly hitting a woman in the face as she lay on her back just off a Los Angeles freeway. The man who shot the footage, David Diaz, a self-described music producer, spoke with NBC4 about what he saw. He says, quote, she took a left and the cop, the CHP, ran after her, grabbed her, trying to subdue her, and then she, kind of tried to shove it off. Was she intoxicated? Was she mentally ill? Possibly, Diaz said. No one condones when he gets on top of a woman, and this is a big officer, and he punches her repeatedly. I think he punched her in the head 15 times. End of quote. The video footage begins as a CHP officer is standing next to a red pickup truck on the freeway on-ramp. He makes his way across to a concrete median where he follows a woman who is walking there and carrying a white bag. Moments later, the officer tries to grab the woman's arm as she appears to resist. As he tries to gain control over the woman, he throws her to the ground. While the woman is on her back, the officer holds her down and delivers about a dozen hits to her head and upper body in about 11 seconds, according to the video. These are like grown men on top of you, punching you to a point where she could have died out there, Diaz said. The woman, who was not immediately identified, appeared to use her arms and hands to protect her face from the officer's blow. A second man joins the officer to help control the woman as she is placed in handcuffs. She was screaming, witness Dana Tate said. 2 men were on her. They had her arms up. She couldn't defend herself. She looked totally helpless and terrified. It was shocking, and you really can't call the cops on the cops. Another witness who didn't want to be identified told NBC4 the woman did not look well mentally when she was walking along the freeway. The woman was carrying a lot of bags and not wearing shoes, only black socks, the witness said. After she was brought down to the asphalt by the officer, the woman put up her arms, trying to guard herself, the witness said. She looked terrified. I like that quote. You can't call the cops on the cops. And this is true, because police have a monopoly on force, and if you try to resist, then they make your life extremely miserable if they don't kill you. The American Conservative has an excellent article entitled 7 Reasons Why Police Brutality is Systemic, Not Anecdotal. Reason number 1, many departments don't provide adequate training in nonviolent situations. This is particularly obvious when it comes to dealing with family pets. Police Kill Family Dog is practically its own subgenre of police brutality reports, and most of these cases, like the story of the Minnesota children who were made to sit handcuffed. Children sit handcuffed. Did you catch that? Minnesota children who were made to sit handcuffed next to their dead and bleeding pet are all too preventable. Some police departments have begun to train their officers to deal more appropriately with pets, but this is taking a long time. Number 2, they say standards for what constitutes brutality vary widely. Excess is in the eyes of the beholder, explains William Terrell, a former police officer and professor of criminal justice at Michigan State University. To one officer, objectively reasonable means that if you don't give me your license, I get to use soft hands. And in another town, the same resistance means I can pull you through the car window, or I can tase you. While national legislation would likely only complicate matters further, Local or statewide ballot propositions should allow the public, not the police,